Welcome to the OpenJ9 community call for April 5th. If anyone has any important business to bring up right now, we'll listen to that. Otherwise, Lan has an update on grinders. You can go ahead when you're ready, Lan.
Okay, perfect. I will share my screen. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna talk about the grinder update. Let me. If you go through this link, we have previously recorded Aqua Lightning Talk series, which we talk about the grinders, how to use grinders, and today is another basically update session or to talk about the enhancement that we have lately with the grinder. And let's get started. If you remember, in the grinder, we have an option called SDK resources, and we can set it to releases or nightly. Before this basically means that we will go to adopt OpenJDK API to grab either the nightly SDK for OpenJ9 or the releases. With the recent update, what happens is if you choose SDK resource equal to releases, we will go to Cymru API instead, and then download the Cymru Open Edition for you to run the test. Because Cymru API does not provide OpenJ9 nightly, so if you do SDK resource equal to nightly, we will fail the build with explicitly the error message saying, you cannot do that. We don't have the SDK for OpenJ9 nightly. Because a couple of developers got stuck on this, so we thought that will be a clear message to send out if you try to do so. Then the question becomes, okay, I want to get nightly OpenJ9, what should I do? We talked about to use SDK resource equal to nightly and customize SDK URL in the previous session. For this one, the enhancement here is you'll be able to use parameters in the SDK URL. So if you use the combination of those two parameters, SDK resource equal to nightly and then customize SDK URL, you'll be able to pass in the JDK version, that's a parameter, and the platform. So basically, at the runtime, we will dynamically figure out what is the URL based on the JDK version and platform for that particular run. I will have a demo to talk about this. So on a related note, I want to mention is there is a multi-grinder feature that also comes with the grinder. We never really advertised it, but I want to let people know we do have a feature to allow people to launch multiple grinders with one click. Platform JDK version and JDK import can take comma separated values. So we have example here, like platform, you can do X Linux, comma, Mac, comma, Windows. Same thing for JDK version and same thing for JDK import. So this is really allowed user to say, if I want to run my test on multiple platforms, I can launch a grinder with one click, or I want to run the test, just compare the behavior between 8 and 11, or I want to compare OpenJ9 and Hotspot. So let's just quickly jump to my demo. So this is the build app launched previously. So in this case, as you can see, you have SDK resource equal to nightly, and then customized URL, SDK URL is with parameters. By the way, this is a default setting. I changed it for both OpenJ9 Jenkins and then HYC Jenkins grinder. So this is basically default settings. If you just run the build grinder without changing anything, you will get that. What it will happen behind the scene, if you look into the console output in detail. So what happens is we will take the user input and we'll try to figure out what is the latest build. In this case, based on this Artifactory link, it is build 260, and we will download all the basically targets from that, which include test image, JDK, sometimes GRE, and test image. And then we just download them and then continue the test like usual, regular build, nothing different after that. And then with the comma separated values, what you can do, this is another grinder that I launched. So you can do, so this is example, you can just, like you use regular grinder, but you put, whatever platform you want to run. In this case, I also want to run on 8 and 11. What happens is this suddenly become a parent build. It will launch 4 children's with basically the compilation of platform times the JDK version in this case. So let's look into the console output. So at the bottom, you will see I have 4 child grinder launched, right? So for JDK 8 on Mac, 11 on X Linux, 11 on Mac, and 8 on X Linux. I'm just going to one of the child. By the way, just be aware, it launches itself. It doesn't go to like grinder underscore test list or iteration. That sort of is a different parallelization. But with you can follow that parent job to find a child. This is one of the child job, and then if you look at the parameters, it will run the Mac, and it will run JDK version 8. So that's just one of the example here. That's it for this update. Any questions you guys have?
Is there a possibility of either getting chiclet support or TRSS support so it's easier to see the results for all the multiple children?
We can look into that, but currently I don't think it's supported at this point. Basically, in general, we don't monitor grinder in TRSS. We just monitor the regular build.
Maybe a checkbox or something to have it go into TRSS? Because I guess if you start a lot of children, you're going to have to open every single one individually and to check your results.
Right, yeah.
But not to be negative, this is a great feature.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
No problem. I think if no more questions, I will stop
sharing. I have a question, Lan. For the parent job for a multi-grinder, how does customized SDK URL work?
Customize. So again, you use this combination, right? You use, for example, you use SDK nightly and customize with parameters. You cannot give me pointing us to a specific SDK and running the multi grinders because that's not gonna work. So for example, right? If I can find my parameters again, to do here. If you, let's say, point to a specific, I don't have it here, but if you point it to a specific jar, tar, GZ, it will not work because then it's for example, it's for X Linux, then you run the grinder for Mac, it's not gonna work. It has to be like either use the parameters here, or you can say if you can use SDK resource equal to releases, right? In that case, right? In that case, we'll go into the API.
Cool, thank you.
No problem.
I guess it'll work for the regular builds, but it wouldn't work for special builds where we have different build specs for the platform, like Valhalla or would it?
I have to check because what does Valhalla where? I have to check how Valhalla uploads was into the Artifactory. is it following the similar format? If it is, then we should be able to. Like, for example, does Valhalla do JDK? JDK version become Valhalla? Is that in the OpenJ9 Artifactory? If that's the case, then we'll be able to grab it. If not, then we have to look into how that how SDK is uploaded into OpenJ9 Artifactory server.
Yeah, so in my memory, the JDK version is Valhalla for Valhalla build.
Right, JDK version in the test build is Valhalla, but does it upload to the Artifactory also is Valhalla? So basically, we're leveraging where the SDK is uploaded to the position of that. Right.
And it depends on the spec. Another example would be the AOT spec, where
Right.
the platform has underscore AOT on the end, but all that does is trigger a different set of tests.
From the test point of view, we don't have AOT. The AOT is at upstream.
I see.
Right. So it's really all we need to do is go into the Artifactory and take a look and how they upload it. So say for example this has AOT, then we need to maybe I think what will work if we do the underscore AOT here. Because that's this one, right? Or we need to find a nightly, but you get the idea. Is it too small for people to see? Right? We have the same format, but with the suffix of AOT.
Yeah, the Valhalla builds are similar. Perhaps we need like a feature variable because CRU Valhalla all append the feature at the end of the name.
Yeah. I'm gonna do a test. It's JDK next. I'm gonna do a test after this call. I think it will work if just do the JDK next and then just put in the platform and then get to Valhalla here. Just if I can find them. So just modify this one, right, to match with change that to a platform. Does it make sense?
Yep.
Like that. I can do a test and verify that and get back to you guys.
Is there a problem with next?
It shouldn't be because all the behind the scene we just take this as it is and trying to figure out what
Is next an accepted JDK version?
No, JDK test doesn't take from this. This is basically just saying, tell me where it is. I don't care. Give me a URL. That's it. The JDK version is from this. Where's the JDK version? It's from here, right?
So,
That's the JDK
so we wouldn't put next in there. We would put 19.
Do we have a 19 here? I don't think we have a 19. Sorry.
Oh, we have next.
No.
That's what I'm wondering. Can you put next under JDK version?
I think so. I remember there's a feature was added that if you put the next, then we'll try to figure out what next is. But I have to double check. It was a long time ago for OpenJDK test, because we have the next, and then we need to figure out extension repo. So there was a feature added to support the next. Yep. But for Valhalla and AOT, I will try to do some tests and verify it, and I will just basically add in the description, like I did for those ones. I will add example for Valhalla and an AOT.
Oh, if there's no other questions, thanks, Lan. This is going to be very useful, I think.
No problem. Thank you.
Go back to the agenda. Next up, 031. We did get the fix we were waiting for, so there's nothing really left in the milestone plan other than the reminder to update OpenSSL, which you've already done. Not expecting any more updates there. So now it comes down to testing. We need to run all the testing multiple times and make sure that there's no regressions, that we're in a good position to ship Java 18, and then we can get it out the door. So I know some IBM internal testing has started, and we did some testing on the weekend in the open, and didn't see any regressions there, so things are looking good so far. So we'll keep monitoring the IBM internal tests and do the triage of that and see how it goes. Does anyone have comments on 031?
Do we have an ETA on when that testing will be complete?
The initial set of tests should be complete today. Hopefully we'll be able to triage them today as well. Depends on how much of the testing falls over and needs to be restarted. But I think we need more than just this single test. We're also going to be doing 032 milestone 2 testing. And I'd like to get through that testing and triage that as well, which should all happen this week. Because the failures don't necessarily show up easily in Java 18. They could show up on other releases if there's intermittent problems. So that would give me more confidence if all the versions look good for 031 and 032, that we're ready. So I'm thinking next week is what we're targeting for putting out the Java 18 GA.
So by the Tuesday of next week, basically by the next one of these calls?
That sounds reasonable. We could at least have OpenJ9 tagged appropriately by next Tuesday, assuming we don't find any issues. And then the summary publish will depend on IBM schedules, but we could try to get it done for next Tuesday.
Yeah, I think from the purposes of this call, if we've tagged the release, then the open community's completed its due diligence on that. So I think that works from my perspective.
Okay, so next up is 032. I'll bring up the milestone plan for that. I assume everybody can see what I'm looking at, the 032 milestone.
I cannot see the screen
Yeah.
here.
Sorry. I attempted to share, but I guess I didn't hit the right thing.
That's good.
So Daryl, do you want to take over and take us through the JIT issues in the milestone plan?
Sure. First one is the one I talked about last week. Asked for some VM input on that. I think Babnita started looking at that this week. So hopefully we'll hear something back soon. The next one is the one that Annabelle's been looking at. She's making slow progress on it. I think we're trying to see if it's still reproducible. I think even Toby asked the question this morning if it's still reproducible. So that's still to be confirmed. If not, we've got a core file that we're able to get some information out of, but not a lot. But still working on that slowly. Third one, Kevin was going to look at it. He is tied up and may not be able to get to that anytime soon, so I might have to find someone else to help him with that. What's the next one? The 14654, that is the one that Brad was looking at. We haven't been able to reproduce that one yet, but it was shown to be fairly reproducible on a Windows build of late. So he's going to take a look at that one, well, imminently, to see if he can get a same kind of reproduction. And the ARch64 one, that one is the one that's fixed with the removing the stable API. So I think once the 0.32 change is merged, that'll close. And that's it for the JIT issues.
All the changes are merged for the catch exception test in all the streams. At one point, there was talk of investigation into inlining, but I think that was dropped. So if you're okay to close it, we can close it now.
Yeah, let's close it. Method handle inlining, there's a separate ongoing investigation throughout this year to improve performance by improving inlining. So it's just sort of part of all of that investigation.
Okay, and the last one, there's some internal investigation going on about how to fix that. Meanwhile, we started milestone 2, as I mentioned. We've tagged for milestone 2, and IBM will start doing the Semru builds this week as soon as the 032 Java 18 build is completed. And then we'll triage those and see where we're at. Does anyone have questions or other comments about 032? Does anyone have updates on Adopt they'd like to share? Adam, do you have any machine updates?
Sure. Biggest change is we added a 1 terabyte disk to Jenkins, and we migrated the home to it, so we shouldn't have any more space issues. The other thing I wanted to ask Daryl about, if he had an opinion on, OSU now offers ARch64 Linux, and so that's something we'd like to pursue. We still have the Equinix machines, but we're still waiting on more disks there, so I think we only have 4 or 5.
Yeah, it's not enough.
Yeah.
It is slow to get through all the testing, overnight testing on ARch64.
So they have said they're going to get us more disks, but it's like a couple months out.
Yeah, more hardware is always better, especially on like that platform where it's fairly limited to begin with. So yes, I support that.
So I can.
Does it cost us anything?
Adam, which machines do you have from Equinix from that? Is it the Ultras?
Mount Jade, I think.
Right, yeah, they're the new ones.
So we have lots of CPU and RAM available, but we don't have enough disks to make enough machines. So I think we only have 5 at the moment.
Okay.
We're hoping for 8.
Yep. How are you running the virtual machines? We at Adopt we used Docker containers for it, so it's a bit easier to manage the disk space across all of them. Are you using the same or something else?
I think the compile is in a container. I don't think the testing is.
Okay.
Yeah, the OSU stuff is free. We just have to ask for it, kind of like what we did for the other P-Linux stuff. My only concern is resources to set up the machines.
Yeah.
Human resources. But we'd have to get them first, so we can push on that. That's all I had.
Any outlook for getting the remaining Windows machines back online?
Not really.
Because that's hurting
Were you
us.
able to turn on the testing you had turned off? Or are you still reduced test load?
I did turn back on the Java 8 Windows testing that I had turned off previously. I think we weren't able to get through it because some machines were offline that didn't need to be. But it does take a long time to get through the nightly testing. It runs quite long into the day, especially when there's other builds scheduled like AOT and acceptance builds. So I don't know that there's a lot of extra time for PR testing.
Okay.
Depends on the day and what runs. So it is kind of important we get these machines back.
Okay.
Even if we don't have the swap space, there are tests that fail fairly regularly because we don't have, I'm assuming it's because we don't have enough swap space, but those are fairly easy to ignore.
Okay. Okay, I'll see if I can poke some cycles at it.
Devin, do you have any update on CMake?
No, not much new to report there. I'm coming off vacation from last week, so just kind of figuring out where I left things off, and yeah.
Is Marius on? Is there any update on JIT server? I don't see Marius. MicroJIT next meeting is April 7th, and I know there's a PR open that's been having some review comments now and again. Toby CRIU, any updates there?
Yeah, so since last week, we've just been investigating what looks like to be a small regression, about 30 milliseconds on restore time. We believe it may be caused by the new changes we added for detecting environment variables, or potentially due to the fact that we're loading the library earlier than we were and with previous changes. We're currently doing performance testing with different variations of that behavior just to try to identify where that regression may be coming from. The work to throw on blocking operations in single thread mode is currently being reviewed. So stuff looks close, should be in soon. There is also some work investigating what we need to do with EJB timers, whether it's something that uses the underlying Java util time, or if it's in-house implementation. There's a bit of back and forth with the Liberty team on that stuff. As far as the early access stuff is concerned, we're very close to releasing something. And I think that we should have some builds accessible soon. And that's the update.
Thanks. Is Jack on? Is there any update on Project Loom?
Not much to update from last week. We've been still working on the merge conflicts with the new OpenJDK's Loom branch. Some progress has been made in getting rid of some of our own changes that would have to modify the OpenJDK thread library. I'm still working on getting the rest of the changes done in order to minimize the changes that needed to go into the extension repo. So we want to keep as much change possible into OpenJ9. I think Jason has been doing the same thing in terms of adopting OpenJDK thread library in the main branch. And that's it for Loom.
Okay, thanks. Cheng, I saw you were typing updates. You want to give us your updates?
Yeah, in terms of downcode, I think already merged all changes, incorporated changes, including the OpenJ9 and the OpenJDK extension. For the app call, so far already fixed up all the function issues. In terms of primitive and structure on the Linux PPC area, I will double check this week to see if there's anything else to adjust. Except there's a couple of intermediate failures caused by the OpenJDK mess handler, but that need to more time to investigate. And I'll keep going, working on X PPC 64 if there's nothing else to address. So that's about it.
Thank you. Mac M1, we're putting out an early access build for 18, and again for 032 for Java 11, 17, and 18. I don't know if there's anything else to bring up there.
No.
Compressed ref support, it says to be started in March.
Yep, it started this week. Looking at that again.
But April then.
Yeah.
Okay. Keith, I assume the rename is still going on in the background?
The which is going on in the background?
The shared library
Oh, the
rename?
rename. Yeah, it's a little bit further on the back burner than I would like, but yeah, I haven't forgotten about it.
Then there was a question about supporting OpenJDK method handles in JDK 8 and 11. Babneet, do you want to take us through that?
Yep. So I did ask all the stakeholders, and I think the answer was yes, we do need to support OpenJDK method handles in 8 and 11. So we looked at various factors when the support ends, what it will cost us to support 2 different implementations of method handles. And we also looked at customer issues for which we are relying on OpenJDK method handle support in 8 and 11. And overall, I think it looks like it will be beneficial for us to support OpenJDK method handles in 8 and 11. I think from a time spent versus time remaining to end of life analysis, it looks like we'll get 3 years with JDK 11 and 7 years with JDK 8 if we complete this work by mid 2023. And so there's definitely value in pursuing this work. I'm open for discussion.
Dan, I know you raised this earlier. I think there is some question about the end of service dates for OpenJ9 because OpenJ9 is dependent on how long the 8 and 11 are supported in OpenJDK. So I know Adoptium, they don't have firm end of service dates. They say at least 2024, but it could go out further if somebody's going to continue support at OpenJDK.
Yeah, so it would be a challenge for OpenJ9 to support longer than OpenJDK does. But that doesn't mean that OpenJ9 has to support for as long as OpenJDK does. We still have options to say it doesn't make sense to continue support for this particular release. What I'm slightly concerned about with this model or the information here is it's very backwards looking. It's looking at 8 and 11 and how long they may continue to last, but it doesn't take into account the opportunity cost. As we look forward, the release cadence in OpenJDK appears to be changing to a 2-year release cadence, which means that we'll have our next LTS. I think that'll be what, JDK 21 in 2023?
Yep.
So, at that point we would have 8, 11, 17, and 21 all in support at the same time. And that means that to get 21 out the door on time and in a performant fashion, we're going to need to be putting people on features that are coming out there. Does it make sense to sink the time into backporting this? Because the other piece that I don't know, we believe there will be performance improvements to this, but there will also be a lot of retuning required by people who have assume the characteristics of the existing OpenJ9 implementation. I would expect that with the change in implementation, we will be consuming more class-related memory. So people who are, running compressed refs and at the limit of what they're currently able to fit in their class memory may need to retune when they adopt this. So I'm a little concerned. We've looked back and said, oh yeah, this will be good for 8 and 11, but we haven't looked forward and said, here's what we have to give up to do this.
So I think for this, I think I will have to defer to Toby and see if at the macro scale, if there will be resources available to support this as well as new features in future releases.
Yeah, Dan, so I think you've raised a good point. There is a cost to backporting to JDK 8 and 11. There is a cost to customers because this is a new implementation. The behavior is very different. The characteristics are different. And so I think whatever decision we make, we need to be aware of that. I think it's also important to recognize that there is a cost to not backporting as well. So we have to weigh both of those. And I think that's why we're having the discussion. I think, to me, it's not completely clear which one is going to cost us more. And so I think if we can raise the cost on both sides, as you've done, then we can, if we have all the information in front of us, then I think it'll be easier for us to make that decision.
I think the other piece of this that we should look at is when we started with our release cadence for OpenJ9, we said we were going to use a single release stream to support releases going forward until it didn't make sense to do that anymore. As we get more and more of these releases in flight, and some of them become quite old, we had talked about splitting off support for the oldest of them and keeping them up to date only with security fixes. And so I do wonder if we need to take a look at this and say, is this the point at which it makes sense to split 8? So we're not driving new things into 8 anymore. It becomes purely a security update stream.
Eight has such a long lifetime, longer really than Java 11. I think there are certain changes that still need to go back into 8, like support for new platforms.
Do support for new platforms need to go back into 8? I'm asking a little bit on this and pushing on it because people who have an application on 8, if they're upgrading to a new platform, they would be upgrading their OS, they would be upgrading their libc, they'd be upgrading a whole bunch of other pieces. Doesn't that seem like the right time to upgrade your Java as well?
It would be nice if they did. I'm not sure that's always the case. I don't know if there's any set end of currency date for Java 8.
I think I have a link. I can look that up.
Part of the problem here is that it's not entirely compatible to move off of Java 8 to Java 11 or later versions. And as you move farther along, it gets more incompatible. So customers may not be ready. You know, they might be forced off the older OS because it's out of service, but they may not be ready to move off Java 8 because it could be a lot of work.
I would expect that moving from an out of service OS to a new OS would be the similar level of work, or that we would have. Are we still really adding new OS support to 8?
Yes.
And is that more than just, you know, continuing to build on an old platform so it runs on the newer? Are we actually doing any active work there?
Well, said Artemis comes to mind. Windows 11, we had to make a change to recognize Windows 11. OpenSSL support is going to be updated, hopefully, to support the new OSs which no longer ship OpenSSL 1.1.1. So Ubuntu, is it 2204 is coming out later this month, which ships with OpenSSL 3 only. Similarly, Red Hat 9.
When we compare to what OpenJDK is doing, are they continuing to add support for these OSs as well?
Yes, for Windows 11. ZOS support doesn't apply. They don't have the OpenSSL problem that OpenJ9 has.
Just looking at the level of changes we would need to make for that seems to me to be much smaller than backporting method handle support and continuing to drive development and new changes into 8. If we look at our testing load, there's a lot of testing that has to be run on 8 as we make changes to support newer features, and as those features become more and more incompatible with older releases, we either deal with large behavior changes on quite stable streams, or we deal with dual maintenance. For something as old as 8 that needs to live to whatever the data ends up being, dual maintenance seems like a safer proposition.
There is another sort of a different argument for having a single implementation going forward, and it does have to do with the maintenance of the existing method handles implementation. I mean, I'll speak selfishly for the JIT here for just a sec, in that the two implementations are quite independent, and the implementations are spread out fairly pervasively throughout the code base. I mean, I'm not that bad, but it's in certain parts of it, they're not neatly compartmentalized with ifdefs or anything like that. So you can't just switch one on or off. And quite frankly, the skills that we have for maintaining the old one are quite in short supply at the moment, to the point where if we were to keep going forward, we would have to have someone trained into learning this old implementation and being prepared to do any work there. So the code itself, with the two implementations in the code, it's difficult for anyone that hasn't looked at this code before sorry, when I say this code, I mean the method handles code, to really know which version applies to which part of the code applies to which version of method handles, OpenJDK or OpenJ9. So the technical debt of maintaining two of these is quite high. So the cost of doing that is going to have to be factored in against any of the future work that we have to do for performance, for fixing problems and all that. Just the fact that we have to always see around these two implementations in the code. And you know, who knows, that maintaining that could take away from some of the work that, you know, you mentioned before about that we have to do for future JEPs. So it's hard to quantify that, but I can tell you right now that we're already fairly exposed on being able to maintain or do any work at all on the old method handles implementation. So having a unified one going forward would certainly be our strong preference. Now, if, as you were saying, if other older releases could be forked off, then that obviously would you know, that may be a solution, and maybe that is something that we should talk about at some point. But anyway, at this point, I think the cost of doing the maintenance and the cost of adding new features to a code base that is already very complex has to be factored in too.
It's a good point. Abney, have you looked at the method handle implementation in OpenJDK in 8 and 11 to see how different it is between what we have in 17 or what we're supporting in 17 now?
I've only looked at it from a perspective of the failures, which I'm seeing, and the failures looked identical to what we're seeing in JDK 17. So the implementation looks identical, but it may be slightly different in terms of a few things may be named differently, or so it should be fairly identical to backported to 11 and 8. We just need to quickly look at the same places where we looked for JDK 17 and onwards. But I haven't directly looked into the OpenJDK implementation to see, because the code base is very large. The time to look at those things will take a lot of time. So I'm using an approach where we only need to fix failures by enabling whatever we have added for JDK 17.
So when you say that the failures look largely the same, is that on both 8 and 11?
For 8, I'm unable to run tests yet. So, but that's the belief. I'm guessing 8 and 11 shouldn't be that different. So, but I will have to run the tests to be completely sure. Currently, I'm unable to compile.
We have a clearer picture of what it would take to backport 11. With 8, there's a bit more investigation needed.
I think 8's the 8 with its longer lifetime is the bigger concern in this.
Yep, agreed. And I was also thinking whether we should support 8 first and then 11. So for that, I will also do the analysis of failures for 8 before any work is done for 11.
Yeah, and I think to Daryl's point, we probably need to make a decision on splitting off 8 as part of this. If we intend to keep 8 in the main line, then the code maintenance concerns from the JIT team are pretty strong. For splitting it off, then becomes a more manageable problem. So I think coming out of this discussion, we have a bit of analysis to do to figure out how different the method handle implementation in OpenJDK is between 8 and 11 or 8 and 17. We need to understand what kind of costs we with this move, particularly for things like classes being loaded and used in the shared classes cache, because we do have customers, or we have users, sorry, that that are probably very close to the limits on what they can load class-wise into the shared classes cache with the way they've tuned their environments. Or sorry, into the shared classes cache is not the word I want. Into the sub-allocator memory for compressed drafts. I know that that's been a perpetual problem on the Z, for example. So I think we need some analysis there. And then we need to make the decision on whether we're splitting or not.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add is there's an inherent cost to having a separate, like a completely different method handling implementation to OpenJDK. Over the years, we've kind of attempted to bridge that cost, but there's still some things that still don't work properly on the J9 implementation. Things like method handle proxies that we have never addressed. And in the last few years, we were kind of under the assumption that we would backport, so we would just wait until we backported and then those issues would be addressed. If we do take the decision to not backport these things, effectively what we're saying is that we're never going to address those issues. Now, I don't think it affects a large number of people, but it may affect some. So I think that's something we should also keep track of.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know how many use cases we're actually talking about here. My impression, if it's confined to things like method handle proxies, is that they are minimally to effectively not used. So are these random internal tests that we found an issue with, or is this actually being reported by end users? Do you have a sense of which case that is, Toby?
So I know there were some user-raised issues. There were some, I think the Minecraft people were one of them. There was another one I recall. I recall looking at, I don't recall who opened it, but I've seen this appear a couple of times in the OpenJ9 user issues. It's something that it's a significant amount of work to implement in J9. So it never seemed worth it to do the work to support it in J9 while we were actively trying to support the OpenJDK implementation.
Okay. I don't expect we're going to come to a conclusion on this. We have identified some things that need further analysis. Babneet, is that something you'd be able to do the analysis on, the difference between 8 and 11 or 17?
Yes, I can do that. Can you clarify the point about classes loaded to the sub-allocator memory? I made a point below at the end, but I think I need more clarification. I can talk to you directly on Slack for those clarifications.
Yeah, you can reach out to me on Slack, that's fine. But just for everyone's understanding, when we have shared classes enabled, or sorry, when we have compressed references enabled, we have to put classes into a sub-allocated block of memory so that they're accessible by a sufficiently small pointer that we can do the compression on them. And there's a limit to how much memory we grab for that sub-allocator because it affects where the heap ends up, and there's a bunch of memory geometry that gets affected by this. So trying to shrink everything small enough to fit can cause problems.
I hadn't heard that. I've seen issues where Windows particularly, you can't allocate more low memory because of the way Windows allocates memory bottom up. But I hadn't heard about people running out of memory.
Historically, we've had Z issues with where the heap gets located, with the size of the sub-allocated block of memory for people who are running their systems very close to the limit.
Doesn't sound quite right because the object heap on Z has a fixed area that can't be used for anything else. Unless you're thinking about, no.
I was going to say I may be wrong then. It's been a couple of years since I've had to look at one of these issues, but
there is less memory overall on Z because the heap starts at 2 gig. So I suppose other things could be taking up 31-bit memory. So there might be competition between the VM and something else that's using 31-bit memory.
yeah, it sounds like you've got a better handle on this than I do, but might be worth checking with Dimitri as well, because he would have been the other person who would have been pulled into a lot of these discussions.
I think Pete is correct. It's below 2G where we allocate sub-allocator on Z.
Do you recall issues where we have had customers that are, or users that are running right to the limit of what we can get with the sub-allocator?
Not really. It might be another problem because on Z Linux we still allocate memory bottom up because we want to minimize shift, and sometimes it might be not enough pre-reserved memory for sub-allocated, but also I'm not sure. I have heard about problems that there is not enough space below 4G bar because too many classes. Maybe some of them, maybe it's not just reaching GC.
It's not that they ran out of the amount of memory that's theoretically possible. It's that they ran into some practical limit and they had to move the heap, or they had to pre-allocate more memory for the sub-allocator or something like that. There's an option. I think you get 200 megabytes by default, or maybe we doubled it to 400 megabytes. But if that's not enough, there's an option where you can pre-allocate more, or we could change how much we're pre-allocating if people are running into it all the time.
Yeah, it sounds like this is less of a problem than I thought it was, if neither of you have a sense that this is a common enough issue. So maybe that's moot.
Oh, we could ask Manching, but I think it's well understood, and Service probably knows what to tell customers whenever it arises.
Yeah, my concern would be if this is something that's arising suddenly for them with a large change in 8 or in something that's been long since deployed.
Yeah, so it'd be something to look out for. Maybe we need to modify the amount we're pre-allocating. If I'm right about it being 400 meg now, if that's not enough, we'd have to increase it.
So it sounds like there's some analysis we need to do there, but it may be much less of an issue than I was expecting.
It seems like the discussion's winding down for today, and we've gone awfully long. So unless anyone has any more points, I think we could call the end, and we can continue to discuss all the things that have been raised, and get an update next week or in the following weeks. Not hearing any other comments, so thanks everyone. I'll stop the recording.